Hello and welcome to Pandoradom. My name is Miles Gray, reporting live from Israel. Now, I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about some of the madnesses that I have been encountering. Now, some of you may be aware of what is sometimes referred to as politics regarding the Middle East and we'll say Levantine interactions. But the question is, what exactly are you aware of? What two sides, what manifold sides are you aware of? What have you learned? In what way have you been educated, indoctrinated, inculcated about the goings on of the Levant? That is to say, Israel and surrounding countries. I would I would hazard a guess and say whatever side you are on, you are probably somewhat misinformed. Now, you may ask, well, what about you, Miles? How informed are you? Well, at the risk of being pretentious, preposterous, ignominious, I have to say that, in fact, I am among the more rational, prepared to admit persons that you are going to find who is speaking about this. It's not an easy thing to be balanced. Now, when I say balance, it doesn't mean that you simply err on the side of world peace. It doesn't mean being a pacifist at all costs. It doesn't mean being a liberal or a leftist in that way. I mean, really, honestly, are we going to kid ourselves about things like that? That is the left really a bastion of peace? Is the right? Is the center? What people really is for peace? Perhaps, yeah, of course, there are peoples, there are sects that espouse peace, but often their very existence teeters and balances on the wars of others, that they are kept in peace by the wars that others fight on their behalf without them knowing. Even Quakers. How is it that a Quaker is able to practice in the United States? It is on the back of war. Doesn't mean that the general idea is invalid, though. You can still be a lover of peace, even knowing that your sect balances on the back of war. You can say, well, that happens to be the case, but it doesn't have to be the case. That we are willing to exceed. But you cannot kid yourselves and say that at the current time that it is not so, because it is manifestly so. It is evident. It is self-evident. Now, what I want to talk about a little bit is a fascinating development that I've noticed on Quora. Now, Quora is not something that I routinely have used over the years. It's something that every once in a while I have sort of taken a look at. And the problem, of course, is well known. There's sort of a long-standing internet memery around this idea that Quora, like many other sites on the internet, is a place full of pseudo-intellectuals. This is sort of one of the running jokes, but it's really not a joke. I mean, it actually is filled with pseudo-intellectuals. The question, of course, you can call me a pseudo-intellectual if you want to, but I'm not even saying that I'm not. It's simply that I can also, like, I'm intellectual enough to be able to say that Quora is in fact filled with pseudo-intellectuals. Doesn't mean that everybody on Quora is one, and it doesn't even mean the majority of people are, but there are enough pseudo-intellectuals on Quora that it should be classified as a place that is full of pseudo-intellectuals. There are enough there that it would not be hard to run into a Quora answer or question that is characterized by pseudo-intellectuality or pseudo-intellectualism. So, what is it exactly that I'm concerned about? Well, as somebody who is a very well-versed amateur historian, that's not my day job, but it is something that fascinates me and something that I write about in Hebrew, in English, Maltese, Arabic, and other languages. My primary languages are Hebrew and English, but I have some ability in some of the others, mentioned and not mentioned. And it's important to be able to have some kind of fluency. Why? Because if I'm going to make extraordinary claims, I should have an extraordinary sense of the languages in which some of the historical documents are in. You know, this is very important. If you're going to be talking about the conflict in the Levant, that is to say, the what is often called the Israeli-Arab conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in common parlance, you need to have, I suggest anyway, I strongly suggest trying to read historical documents, especially primary sources, in the Hebrew, very, very important. The English, quite important. The Arabic, exceedingly important. And also Ottoman Turkish, quite important. And there are a number of other languages as well, but those are the key languages in modern times with regard to primary sources regarding the conflict here. Now, part of the issue is that many of the people who report about the various historical occurrences here do not know Hebrew very well. Or if they do, they may be native speakers in the case of characters like, dare I mention their names? Let's not get into their names just yet, but just take it from me. Some of the new historians, will say, as they're called, the new historians. These particular characters, at least some of them, have been found to fraudulently mistranslate certain words into English for a wider global audience in their reportage about certain events in Israeli history. And it's very strange. As a translator myself, it's very, very odd, some of the word choices. Translation, as is well known, is not an easy thing to do, and it's a very, very murky profession. But it's beyond that. It's that in some cases there are pretty clear likely translations. There are a likely set of possible translations. When you're translating something that is pretty straightforward, and then you have a particular word that is just outlandishly translated. You know, you say to yourself, this is clearly mistranslated. And it's not like an ad lib mistranslation. It's not like, oh, they're just plugging in random words. It's close enough to the actual meaning, but it's been given a different connotation or even denotation to paint something in a very negative light or a very positive light, as the case may be. You have to be very careful about this. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconstrual about the conflict because of these very mistranslations. And if you look at the history of mistranslation, mistransliteration as well, and related concepts within sort of anthropological linguistics, the very name Jehovah is a result of this phenomenon, coming from the original actual tetragrammaton, whose pronunciation we do not actually know at this point, unless there's some secret cabal that does know it. But that's probably unlikely. Another example, let's see, that's the tetragrammaton is one very prominent one. Oh, and of course, the Virgin Mary. Uh, the idea of virgin is also the result of a mistranslation in essence. It's not quite that simple, but you can call it that. I hate to be giving the truth in this way. I think it's uncomfortable, so I do apologize in the sense of sorry, not sorry. Now, what am I trying to say about Quora? Well, what I have found to get to the point of all this is that on Quora, in the last, I'd say roughly speaking, I've noticed it certainly since October 7th. And if you're not clear of the significance of October 7th, I ask you to go to the all-powerful internet and ask the 8-ball of the internet, what is October 7th? I can't guarantee you're going to get a good idea even from that. And if you don't, please leave a question in the comments and I will be happy to do an episode on that, which I probably will do anyway, a number of episodes. But if not, I can explain it to you. Or someone in the comments can. This is a work that we're doing together. There's a certain amount of teamwork that I expect from you guys, which if you don't object, we are calling, this is Pandoradom, so the Pandora knots. So what is it about Quora that affects me so? I have found, because they're not coming into my email inbox, I can't avoid them. Of course, I could stop them. I could cancel this service. I don't even know how it happened. I didn't, well, I don't have time. I have too many things to worry about within my inbox to wonder how this got into my inbox among the many others. But I find certainly it's a kind of clickbait in a way. These really provocateur type headlines come in, these are the titles of the emails and it says, Quora, and someone will write something like, why did my neighbor why did my neighbor call me an anti-Semite for telling her to take her Israeli flag down from her door? And this is in the context of the United States. I mean, so the question ultimately comes down to two possibilities, one more likely than the other. Possibility number one is that you know very well what you were saying. You know very well, most likely, even if you don't agree, why your neighbor said that you're an anti-Semite for telling her to take the Israeli flag down off her door. And when you include in the body of the text of the question on Quora the presumed knowledge that because the Israeli flag represents oppression, what was it? Oppression, hatred, and injustice is what they said. I mean, you're laying it within the question itself. So either it's that you really know very well what you're doing, and you're essentially an anti-Israel agitator, and that this is an example of agitprop, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Because I believe I think it's originally from it's Soviet lingo. So in Russian, wouldn't it be agitprop? But anyway, so I'll say agitprop, but I think agitprop might be closer. Uh, if I'm not, I could be wrong about that, but I think that makes sense. The other option, the other possibility rather, is that this person really does not know any better. They really don't know why their neighbor said that they're an anti-Semite. I mean, this is it's so absurd because mainly they included that knowledge assumption within the question itself. When they accuse Israel of these characteristics to begin with, within the question itself, it's not so clear what exactly are they wondering about, why they would call them an anti-Semite. It's very rather odd. It's rather odd. Um, Now, in the wake of the war, I myself was in the United States, back in the United States for a while with my family, and we had an Israeli flag. And I, to this day, am not sure whether it was a storm that blew the flag off into the world or if it was torn down by some irked passerby. I suspect the latter, but I also realize it could be the former. And I put it back up, of course. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't have questions about my own country. Doesn't mean that I'm unreasonable. But it does mean that I reject the inveterate lie, which is really a package of lies that is being sold and delivered to the doorstep of the American people, of the Western world, of the Arab world, of the Muslim world, of the world at large. No place is simple. There's no such thing as a simple case when it comes to a place in the world. You couldn't possibly be a fully informed student about any place in the world. Even the greatest, most achieved historian, the most accomplished historian can't know every single detail, can't be completely unbiased. Who is the world's foremost expert on the history of Armenia, on the history of Artsakh? Who is the world's foremost historian of Rhode Island, of the Caribbean, of the island of Jamaica? You have imperfect representations, and yet ones that are great. An example being Ralph Thompson's A View from Mount Diablo. Does that tell me everything I need to know about Jamaican history? Is it not idiosyncratic? It is all those things, but it is a valuable insight. And that is what I can offer you, a valuable insight into not only the world at large, but about the actual realities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When you go to a place like Quora and you see what the people say, you see what the Quarans inquire and query, you see the ones who have the questions about this conflict. and you ask yourself these two things. Is this person truly unknowing and ignorant about this matter, and that they're really a fool, but a fool in the medieval, this a medieval jester like sense? Like, you really, maybe no, not it, that's no, that's too aware. What I mean is a fool in this, like a village fool. That's what I mean, rather. A village fool, excuse me. So you have the village fool who really doesn't know any better, and he actually is asking, I really don't know. Tell me. Even that's too aware. But I mean, someone who says, why is Israel the way it is when it's so evil? Things like this. It sounds made up. It sounds made up. I mean, because it's the insertion of the evil part, because you're inserting a foregone conclusion within the text of the question itself. I mean, that, if nothing, I mean, that just immediately makes you sound like a troll for anybody who has a trained eye. But that's, I mean, does it really require a trained eye to see that? But so it's either that, or number two, this person is using the very special circumstances of the format of Quora itself, that they're exploiting that format to advance their cause in a way that would not be available to them in other more standard formats of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic agitation. Now, if you are somebody who is agitating against Israel in the so-called encampments on the campuses of universities in the United States and in other places, you're saying what you're saying about Israel and about Jews in a very direct way. The question of whether a particular statement or a particular act is anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic or both, and to question whether they're not the same thing, even, it's a very clear thing. It's really rather obvious, and you can answer it very defendably. That's the issue, defendably, without much trouble. You take a look at the slogans, for example, on the picket sign, not picket signs, the protest signs. These are easily demonstrable anti-Semitic canards in many, many cases. Pretty straightforward. You take an anti-Semitic crime in Britain, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, the United States. Not so difficult to understand that an anti-Semitic crime is anti-Semitic. Now, you go to Quora and you see a guy who asks a question about Israel while inserting these foregone conclusionary type remarks as a sort of a side insertion. Like, by the way, what he's doing essentially is he's exploiting the format of Quora itself, which is a question. It allows you to paint yourself, by virtue of it being a question, as an innocent, unknowing town fool who doesn't know any better, village fool who doesn't know any better, and you're able to frame yourself as somebody who is reliable by virtue of not really knowing any better. That you really are just curious, and you're modeling what it is like for the grand majority who also don't really know and may or may not be curious to one degree or another. And in doing so, because in fact you're a spy against going against the other side, you insert these little subliminal messages within the question itself, which are ultimately anti-Israel, anti-Jewish agitationism. So it's either one of the two possibilities, as I've mentioned. It's one, either you really are a village fool and you really do want to know, which is great. That should be what Quora is about. Or two, you're framing yourself as a village fool, but you do know better, and that you really are an anti-Israel and likely anti-Semitic agitator who's using and exploiting the Quora framework to make yourself seem more reliable. Not really reliable, but more, it's going to make you more, you'll more easily be able to influence the passersby, if you will, the e-passersby. People who don't know any better, maybe on the fence, they come across these threads, these questions and answers. And if nobody is saying anything against what these people have said, they take that as the most reliable indicator of what is happening here because they don't have access to, or immediate access. They're certainly not going to search for it to information about the region. And people may say, why does it matter? Well, it's the butterfly effect. All of this matters. And you really never know how it's going to matter. No, you could have a person who becomes president after 40, 50, 60 years. That's a bit long. But these little things, how they are influenced this way or that way in the formative years of their life, it's going to affect their stances on things as more influential characters in their future. But it's not just presidents or congresspersons. It's garbage men, it's shopkeepers, it's doctors, it's lawyers, it's artists, it's poets, it's writers. It's everybody who makes a civilization a civilization. That all these formative influences form who you are over time. And if you have no real understanding, if you question why it even matters to fight this fight, this is your answer. Because you can make a small difference, but because of a kind of butterfly effect, that small difference can have a huge impact because your few words may be the ones that go into turning one person's life from a ball of hatred into a line of love, from a ball of hatred to a line of love. I am Miles Gray with Pandoradom, out.